quick check-in on A Royal Experiment by Janice Hadlow, the biography of George III and his family. George has come out of his madness. He spent about a year or so there, just completely deranged, he unfortunately turned a lot of his insecurities, turned himself on his wife, Charlotte, saying he never loved her and that he wanted to see this other woman that he had an earlier relationship with, perhaps was going to marry, but that didn't happen, and was now demanding that. Just talking nonstop, violent delusions, horrible medical treatments to try and break him out of it. None of that actually seems to have done a bit of good. He finally comes out of it on his own. Fortunately, at the same time, his sons were quickly trying to run through stuff to set up a regency, which, admittedly is probably necessary for the government at the time. The king is super central, is not a figurehead position, makes royal appointments, basically runs the ruling government, makes a decision of who's there, makes all these royal appointments. So that's awkward when he comes to, and it's his son and his two oldest sons were busily working with the opposition to get him out of the way, get his government out of the way. That gets reversed. Apparently he's going to go on for about another 10 years before he then goes back into a madness that he never comes out of. Charlotte doesn't seem to ever really recover. There's a portrait that I went and looked up of her at 44, gray, looking really fucking exhausted. And, even when he's back in, he insists on going to this really boring town for a holiday, which he's in a very fragile mental state, so you can see why he wants to go somewhere boring and talk to farmers about agriculture and stuff, but it's boring the fuck out of both Charlotte and all her daughters. The sons don't have to hang around, they can fuck off to wherever they want. It's one of these things of, yes, dear old dad, when dear old dad is the absolute tyrant king and makes all the decisions and decides whether you are getting married or not. And if you're, as your husband, you just have to be absolutely subservient to him. She's making her best of it. She's making her own little getaway where she can do kind of botany and things like that on her own, but inevitably is going to get dragged back in. And at the same time that all this is happening, that he was going mad in 1789, we have the French Revolution happening and the execution of Louis XVI and Mary Antoinette, which the king and queen, George and Charlotte, feel very, very kind of like, oh shit, that could be us. And there is a lot of unrest in England at the time too. Maybe not unjustified unrest. And George is very much of the opinion that this needs to be ruthlessly put down, or else there will be anarchy, which, you just have to look across the channel, and that's sort of what's happening, even though as a modern person, you're thinking democracy. But there is something to be said for the slow, gradual democracy of a place like England. If there's any ever an example of gradualism, it is probably the United Kingdom versus the sudden explosion, the sudden wrenching, which results in the French Revolution and then the tyranny of Napoleon and a bunch of other bullshit before they finally get to stuff that maybe is sort of around like kind of the democracy of the UK or the Americans, who did have a revolution, but at least they didn't go into a tyranny of George Washington, though George Washington seems to be one of those people, I think, who declined to become the king. So they got lucky in who they had there. At least that's the the story that gets put forward about that. Who knows? There's a lot of hagiography about the Fathers of the Confederation that's slowly getting pulled away, so that might also be a thing. So yeah, there's the personal crap that is happening with George going mad, his feuding with his sons, stuff that apparently is going to start happening with the daughters, who are probably pushed to the edge as well by all of this absolute control and withdrawal and just horrific it's poor rich girls and poor rich boy stuff, but it's also still, you can see why this drives everybody fucking kind of to craziness. But you layer on top of that the very political, wrenching, massive changes of happening, of the giant superpower of France going under and the monarchy there being executed bloodily. It's thing upon thing, which really takes its toll upon the royals. So, as much as my Republican sentiments can take it, you do feel sympathy for them. All right, I will leave it there. More videos later.